Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of TopStep's PowerUp series for SuiteProjects Pro. I'm Ron Brose, CEO. Thanks for joining. For today's PowerUp, we're going to deep dive into approval processes, tips and tricks in SuiteProjects Pro. Within SuiteProjects Pro, there are multiple ways to configure approval workflows. Approval workflows can be very simple, but they can also be very complex. They also will vary by different objects and different records. So let's take a look. So I'm logged into a demo account of SuiteProjects Pro, and we're going to start with the user record. So there are two main records where approval processes are set. The user record is pretty common for being able to set those processes. So if I drill down into a user and I click to jump into my approval settings, here you'll see a list of options. Depending on what records you're using, you may see slightly different options, but timesheets are pretty common, time off requests pretty common, as well as expense reports. It's important to note anything set at a user level is going to be executed after the project level have been processed. So if you are controlling your approvers at a project, then you do not want to also set approvals at the user record because you will be duplicating the approvals. For example, if I've got a manager set here for timesheets, but I've also got manager set for my projects, then managers will get a lot of emails and a lot of alerts for approvals. So you have to think pretty clearly on how do you want the approvals to flow and when do you want the manager involved in the approval process. In this example, if their manager was here, what would happen is all the project owners, let's say, would approve all the timesheets. Once they're all done, then it would execute on the user approval and go to the manager. And they would then have to approve all those same timesheets. What we often see is where the timesheets approvals are set on the project, and at that point, the user becomes a self-approver, meaning there's no further approval process needed, so we can then go ahead and set the approver as approved once it gets through the project. So again, depending on what the business need is, there's a lot of flexibility there for setting it at the user. Looking at it at the project level, if we go to a project, go into project approvers, here we again can set on a project by project basis the approval process or approver of the different records that are enabled. In this account, we've got timesheets, expenses, purchase requests, and invoicing. What we most commonly see is one of two things. One, we use the project owner. We see the project owner here designating whoever the project owner is above in the project will then be set the approver. So this is a benefit if you swap project managers somewhere along the process and you don't want to have to go in and reset your approvals. And that's why we do not recommend hard coding approvals, because if you hard code an approval, what happens is if that person leaves or they're no longer involved in the approval process, now you have to go in and manually change all of your approval process across all your projects. So we want to be able to use either these placeholder tags or a process. And we're going to jump into a process in a minute, but processes are giving you the most flexibility. Again, so setting my project approver here, then once I submit my timesheet, it's going to first look at all the projects on my timesheet. It will execute whatever approvals are here per project. Then it will jump to the user and look if any additional approvers are needed and then execute on those. You'll also notice here something called an additional approver. Now, this is a setting that you can enable, and it actually will enable up to 3 additional approvers. So let's say the reason for these that can be helpful is you might have the project owner as an approver, but you also might have an executive sponsor that wants to also be part of the approval process. And so because we don't have, there's not, other than the project owner, there's no other field on here that we can easily add. You can enable these additional approvers, and then you can hide using form permissions, whatever ones you don't want to use. And then from here, I could add my project sponsor. And then when I go to build my process, I could add both the project owner and the alternate approver where it is set. So if there is none on the project, then it will only execute on the project. So speaking of approval processes, let's go take a look at those. So if I came into administration and timesheets and approval processes, now I have the ability to create unlimited approval processes. And we see often these are set by the different objects they're approving, timesheets, invoices, etc. So if we drill down into these, here we can get quite flexible on how we set these up. So in this example, we have a project owner who is going to be the first approver, but you'll notice we have, say, if the project owner is submitting his own timesheet, we do not want to allow them to approve their own timesheet. So now we have it going to the manager. So again, thinking about how you want to use multiple layers of approval processes. And we said we want the alternate approver to also be involved in the process, but again, also escalating to their manager if they are the timesheet enterer. Now, you'll notice the sequence is very important. This sequence can be set so the project owner's first, and then once the project owner goes, then it goes to the second sequence. In this example, the project owner and the alternate approver are both ones, meaning they both have to approve unless you check the box down here that says a sequence number requires only one approval. When that is set, then whoever basically approves it first is considered the approver of the timesheet. In addition, there's some other really cool flexibility here. Auto approve options are available, and this is mostly around being able to say if it's more than X hours, so you can set it for hours. You can use this for expenses if it's more or less total. So imagine if you said, anything over $1,000 needs to be approved by the manager, that sort of thing. So again, these are all sorts of the different approval options and different auto approvers that you can set. We can also indicate whether if you have in the role that the approver can edit the record through the approval process, you can still control whether they can or can't here. So we may want to say a project owner or a project alternate approver can or can't edit. So this is another option. Lastly, if you have this sort of hierarchy where you have the first approver is the project owner, and maybe they only have 1 day to approve. If you have multiple layers of approvers, you can set so that you can actually escalate if they haven't approved within so many days. So if they have a day to approve and you want to escalate to the next level, you can actually go ahead and, depending on how you have these set up, you may see this assign after option where you can say assign after 1 day if this approver is delinquent after a day. So again, another way to be able to use the system so that you can alert your approvers when the next approver needs to approve it. In addition to approval processes, there are approval alerts that can be set up in the system to make sure the approvals happen in a timely fashion. And of course, you can report on all of the status of all your timesheets that are in an approval state and who is awaiting the approval. So there is a lot, again, flexibility and functionality around approval processes and record approvals within SuiteProjects Pro that each of our customers take advantage of, depending on their needs and their business. From the very simple to the very complex, SuiteProjects Pro has has everything all our customers need to be able to set up effective approval processes for all the different records that they need. Thanks again for joining this PowerUp series. Again, I'm Ron Brose. We're always happy to help. Please visit us on our LinkedIn account or our website, topstepllc.com, if you want to learn anything more or reach out to us.